The memory of my death was a cold stone in my chest. It was not the gentle fading of a life well lived, but the slow, bitter withering of a woman forgotten. In that other life Maya had believed my husband Kai. He stood in this very same crumbling hut, his uniform crisp, his eyes full of a distant future I wasn't part of. He had 2 coveted passes to bring family to his military base. He was taking our son Leo and Clara, the widow of the comrade who had died saving his life. Maya, he had said, his voice a hollow comfort, you and I are husband and wife. When the chance comes I'll come back for you. We will be together again. I, the fool, had clung to those words like a lifeline. I stayed. I waited 3 years, then another 3, watching the thatched roof decay and the winters grow colder. I died in that same bed, my body racked with sickness, my heart shattered by a betrayal that stretched across 6 empty years. I never saw him again. I never saw my son grow up. But today I was 24 again. The sun streamed through the cracks in the hut, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and impending change. Kai was due home today. And this time I was not waiting. I had traded our 2 old hens to the village chief's wife for 30 yuan. She'd counted the notes into my palm with a knowing smile. So, is Captain Kai back to take you and little Leo to the city? I hear the army houses are made of solid brick. You picked a winner, Maya. A military wife. What a life. I forced a smile, the expression feeling foreign on my face. Of course. My husband is an exceptional man. If I don't keep a close watch, who knows what kind of vixen might try to steal him away. My words were light, but they held the steel of my resolve. In my past life, Kai had risen through the ranks, becoming a decorated commander. I, the wife he cast aside, never saw a shred of his glory or a penny of his pay. Everything, his care, his resources, his life, had been lavished upon Clara. Now, reborn with the searing knowledge of what was to come, I would not be cheated again. Whatever was rightfully mine, I would not let a single piece slip through my fingers. The 30 yuan was my ticket out. I tucked it securely into my inner pocket, the paper crinkling a promise against my skin, and headed home. Before I even reached the door I heard it, the sound of laughter. It was a sound that had haunted my first life. The sound of a happy family I was not part of. In the dusty yard, my 6-year-old son Leo sat at a low stool, his small hand clenched around a red pencil, carefully tracing characters. Papa, look. Is this one good? He asked, his voice bright with a need for approval I rarely heard. The man he called Papa stood tall and straight, his military uniform making him seem like a giant from another world. My husband Kai. His features were sharp and handsome, his posture unyielding. Less talking, more focus. Your characters will improve with concentration, he replied, his voice a cool, stern command. And then there was the third person. A woman with a quiet, gentle demeanor that was a perfect counterpoint to Kai's severity. Clara. She bent over Leo, her voice a soft murmur. When she saw him fumble a stroke, she placed her hand over his and guided it, her touch lingering. My stomach churned. The substitute village teacher, the widow of Kai's fallen brother-in-arms, the white lotus who had bloomed so prettily in the ruins of my marriage. I pushed the wooden door open with a force that made it creak violently on its hinges. Well, what a rare guest, I announced, my voice slicing through the idyllic scene. Miss Clara. What brings you to my home today? Just last week I asked if you had time to tutor Leo. He said he was, what was the word? Slow, not suited for books. So why is it that the moment my husband returns, you suddenly find the time to play the devoted teacher? My words were daggers, sharp and unrelenting. Clara's face paled instantly. She didn't look at me. Instead, her eyes, already welling with manufactured tears, turned helplessly toward Kai. I didn't. Maya is misunderstanding me. I didn't give him a chance to fall for it. Before he could speak, I strode forward and pulled Leo to my side. Leo, baby, tell Mama the truth. Did Miss Clara ever say you were slow? My son, caught in the crossfire of adult tensions, froze. He was a good boy, taught not to lie. After a terrified moment, he gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. I smiled, a cold, satisfied curve of my lips. Even the child confirms it, Miss Clara. Do you still deny it? I knelt, wrapping my arms around Leo, but my gaze remained locked on her. My son is 6 years old. You call him slow? Are you trying to break his spirit before it even has a chance to grow? Clara's face cycled through shades of green and white. Her watery eyes darted to Kai, a silent plea. I knew that look. It had worked every single time in my past life. And sure enough, Kai frowned, his brows drawing together. Maya, I'm sure what Miss Clara meant was. I cut him off with a harsh laugh. Oh, I'm certain of what she meant. Then why isn't she tutoring every other child in the village? Why does her sudden dedication to education coincide so perfectly with your return? The yard fell into a thick, suffocating silence. Leo tugged at my sleeve, his small voice a whisper. Mama, Miss Clara taught me how to write Papa today. A pain, sharp and visceral, lanced through my heart. In my first life, this was the look he had on his face when Kai took him away. Under Clara's influence, he had grown distant, cold, until he was a stranger who didn't even return for my funeral. That's enough, Kai's voice boomed, using the tone that commanded soldiers. Miss Clara, thank you for your help today. Maya and I have family matters to discuss. Clara bit her lip, the picture of wounded dignity. But as she left, she couldn't resist a final, soft-spoken barb. Kai, I'll come back tomorrow to continue Leo's lessons. The moment she was gone, Kai's expression shifted from public sternness to private frustration. He squatted down, his voice softening marginally. Leo, go inside and play. Your mother and I need to talk. Once our son had scurried away, Kai turned to me. He pulled a cloth-wrapped bundle from his uniform pocket. It was heavy, clinking softly with the sound of coins. This is the allowance I've saved these past few years. Take it. I looked at the bundle. In my past life, this same gesture had brought me to tears. I had refused, telling him he needed it more out in the world. And he had spent it all on Clara. On pretty clothes for her, on treats, on building a life I was not part of. This time, I reached out and took it without a moment's hesitation. Thanks. I shoved it into my pocket. We were poor. We needed the money. His eyes widened slightly, surprised by my blunt acceptance. He cleared his throat, the real conversation looming. Maya, this time I came back to take 2 people with me to the base. I met his gaze, my own steady and calm. I know. Leo and Clara. His pupils constricted in shock. How could you know that? I guessed, I said with a shrug that was anything but casual. You're a man of your word, Kai. Clara's husband died saving you. You feel you owe her a debt. And Leo is your blood. You can't leave him here in poverty. As for me, I let the words hang in the air, watching the guilt flicker in his eyes. I'm your wife. I'm resilient. Staying behind in this broken hut shouldn't matter, right? His face was a battlefield of conflicting emotions. Finally, he sighed, his voice dropping to a low, placating tone. Maya, I'm glad you understand. The army's resources are limited. For now, I can only take 2. Later, when I'm more established. There is no later, I interrupted, my voice flat and final. I am going with you. Kai shot to his feet, his chair scraping harshly against the packed earth floor. The controlled soldier vanished, replaced by a man whose plans were being upended. What? The word was a sharp crack of sound. That's impossible, Maya. It's against the rules. I stood my ground, my posture mirroring his own unyielding stance. Rules are made by people, I said, my voice dangerously calm. I am your lawful wife. I am Leo's mother. Why is it that he can go but I cannot? Explain that rule to me. His brows furrowed into a deep, frustrated line. Clara's situation is special. Special. I let out a cold, mocking laugh. Is it because she's especially good at playing the victim? Or especially skilled at cozying up to another woman's husband? A muscle twitched in his jaw. Maya, watch your mouth. You will not speak of her that way. Or what, Captain Kai? I took a step closer, my eyes locking with his. Will you discipline me? Don't forget how you ended up here. If my parents hadn't found you collapsed from hunger on our doorstep, if I hadn't given you that half piece of cornbread, you would have been a nameless corpse on a dirt road. They took you in as a live-in husband for me. And now that you've made something of yourself, you think you can just discard the wife who stood by you? Is that the honor the army taught you? My words were a direct hit. His face darkened, the flush of anger warring with the pallor of shame. We were locked in a silent, furious stalemate, the air between us crackling with resentment. Mama? Papa? Leo's small, timid voice came from the doorway. He was peeking out, his big eyes wide with worry. I'm hungry. The tension shattered. It wasn't the time for a final destructive blow. I needed to be strategic. I forced my shoulders to relax and let out a measured breath. "Let's eat first," I said, my tone deliberately softer. "We can discuss this tomorrow." For dinner, I cooked not the simple frugal meals we were used to, but a feast. I stir-fried greens with garlic, made a steaming pot of bean curd soup, and even brought out the precious slab of bacon I had been saving since winter, frying it until it was crispy and fragrant. I moved around the small kitchen with a purpose I hadn't felt in years, the clatter of pots and pans a symphony of my new determination. Kai watched me, a complicated expression on his face. He seemed unsettled by my efficiency, by this new version of me who was neither the meek girl he married nor the weeping wife he expected to leave behind. "Try the bacon," I said, placing a generous piece on his rice. "I cured it myself. It's from old Wang's pig. The best in the village." He took a bite and I saw a flicker of genuine pleasure cross his stern features. "It's good. You can't get this in the army, can you?" I said conversationally. Then I added, layering my words with innocent poison, "I heard Clara is quite the cook though. The wives in the village say she makes excellent pastries." His chopsticks stilled for a fraction of a second. "She sometimes brings some for the men in the unit." Of course she does, I thought, the cold knot in my stomach tightening. In my past life, I'd heard all about how the virtuous Clara won over everyone with her small, thoughtful gestures, seamlessly inserting herself into Kai's world while I was erased from it. "What time is the train tomorrow?" I asked, changing the subject abruptly. 10 in the morning, he answered reflexively before his eyes narrowed with fresh suspicion. "Why do you want to know?" I gave him a faint, unreadable smile. "No reason. Just curious." That night, after Kai and Leo had fallen asleep, Kai on the floor, I in the bed with Leo, I slipped from under the thin blanket. The moonlight filtered through the window, illuminating the dusty interior of the hut that had been my prison in another life. I moved silently, retrieving the small cloth bundle I had secretly packed days ago and hiding it behind the door. Then I took the 30 yuan from my pocket and, with careful, precise stitches, sewed it into the lining of my undershirt. It was my insurance. At dawn, I was already awake, building up the fire and preparing a hearty breakfast of congee and pickled vegetables. By the time Kai stirred, the house was warm and filled with the smell of food. "You're up early," he remarked, his voice still rough with sleep. He looked at me and I saw a flicker of that same complicated emotion from the night before. "Habit," I replied simply, handing him a bowl of steaming porridge. As he ate, I allowed myself to study him. The 6 years in the army had honed him, filling out his frame and sharpening the angles of his face. He was a striking man, charismatic in his stern, silent way. No wonder Clara had set her sights on him. In my past life, it was my own meekness, my blind trust, that had handed him to her on a silver platter. After breakfast, Kai stood and brushed off his uniform. "I'm going to see Clara. Make sure she's ready to go." I moved to block the doorway. "What's the rush?" "I'll go with you." He frowned, his impatience returning. "Why would you?" "To see you off," I said, my smile sweet and utterly false. "Who knows when I'll see you and my son again after this?" My words, and the calm certainty behind them, clearly unnerved him. But he didn't have the energy to argue so early in the morning. With a curt nod, he acquiesced. When we arrived at Clara's small, neat house with Leo in tow, she was already waiting outside, 2 large brand-new suitcases at her feet. They were bigger and more expensive-looking than the patched-up bag that held mine and Leo's combined belongings. "Kai." Her face lit up when she saw him, a radiant, genuine smile that vanished the second her eyes landed on me. It was replaced by a strained, polite mask. "Why, you're here too. What's wrong?" I asked, my voice dripping with false sweetness. "Aren't you happy to see me?" "Of course not." "I mean, of course I am," she stammered, quickly turning back to Kai. "Is the transportation arranged?" "The village tractor will take us to the county train station," he confirmed. I hoisted Leo onto my hip, his small body a comforting weight. "Then let's go. We wouldn't want to miss the train." The journey to the station was a study in subtle dynamics. Clara consistently maneuvered to walk beside Kai, her head tilted attentively towards him, her laughter tinkling at his few short remarks. She deliberately positioned herself between him and me, leaving me to walk behind like an unwanted appendage. I didn't react. I simply watched, my eyes cataloging every glance, every softened tone Kai used with her, storing it all as ammunition. At the bustling station, amidst the cacophony of vendors and families saying goodbye, Kai finally turned to me. He held Leo's hand in one of his and carried Clara's heavy suitcase with the other. I stood empty-handed, the outsider. Maya, I'll see you off here, he said, his voice formal. You should go back now. I didn't move. Instead, I threw my head back and laughed, a loud, sharp sound that cut through the station noise and made several people turn and stare. Who said anything about me going back? Kai froze. What do you mean? Slowly, deliberately, I reached into the inner pocket of my coat and pulled out a small rectangular piece of cardboard. I held it up for him to see. A train ticket. I bought my own ticket, I said, my voice clear and carrying. I'm coming with you to the base. Clara's face went as white as a sheet. You can't, she blurted out. That's not proper. Kai only applied for 2 dependent passes. Passes? I sneered, my gaze fixed on my husband. I'm his legal wife. Since when do I need a pass to go see my own husband? Kai's expression was thunderous. Maya, stop making a scene. The army has rules. I took a step forward, my eyes blazing into his, my voice dropping to a low, hard whisper that only the 3 of yous could hear. Today it's simple, Kai. Either all 4 of us go together or none of us go. You choose. The people nearby were now openly staring, their whispers forming a judgmental chorus. Kai, trapped by his uniform and his public image, couldn't explode. His face was a mask of suppressed fury. Just then the shrill blast of the train whistle pierced the air, a signal of impending departure. He clenched his jaw so hard I thought I could hear his teeth grind. We'll get on first, he bit out, each word strained. We'll talk about this later. It was not a victory, but it was a crucial foothold. I had forced my way onto the battlefield. The war for my life was just beginning. Victory, however small, tasted like cold dust and simmering rage. We boarded the train, a tense, silent procession. The moment we found our berths, the next layer of Kai's plan, and my exclusion from it, became starkly clear. He had only booked 2 sleeper tickets. One for himself and Leo in a lower bunk and one for Clara in the adjacent lower bunk. There was no space for me. I was meant to be a fading memory on a dusty platform, not a physical presence taking up room. Where am I supposed to sleep? I asked, my voice flat, cutting through the awkward silence. Clara, ever the performer, lowered her eyes demurely. Perhaps I can squeeze in with Kai and Leo, she stammered, her cheeks flushing a delicate pink. Maya, you could take my... Dream on, I cut her off with a cold laugh that made a nearby passenger glance over. You, a widow sharing a bed with my husband? Do you have no shame at all? Or do you just not care who sees it? Clara's eyes instantly welled with tears, a perfect on-demand fountain of victimhood. Maya. Kai's voice snapped, sharp with military command. You will apologize to Clara. Now. Apologize. I repeated, feigning thoughtfulness. You're right. Of course. I stepped directly in front of the weeping Clara, gave her a deep theatrical bow and then raised my voice, projecting it through the cramped carriage. Miss Clara, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have called you shameless for wanting to sleep with my husband. I should just step aside and let you have your way. The effect was instantaneous. On a crowded train, where boredom was a constant passenger, scandal was a welcome diversion. Look at that hussy, a woman a few berths down muttered loudly, not even bothering to whisper. Daring to steal a man in broad daylight and on a train. Shameless, another chimed in, her voice dripping with disdain. And he's in uniform. A soldier. Disgracing the service. What a useless man, letting his real wife be treated like this. Clara tried to stammer a defense, but her words were drowned in a rising tide of scornful whispers and pointed glares. Her pitiful act, so effective in private, was crumbling under the weight of public opinion. Kai shot me a look of pure, unadulterated fury. Without a word, he turned on his heel and stalked off down the corridor, returning minutes later to thrust a crumpled cardboard ticket into my hand. A standing ticket. Without a glance at either of us, he retreated to his bunk, the set of his shoulders a rigid line of anger. The moment he was gone, Clara's mask slipped. The tears vanished, wiped away with a quick, sharp movement of her hand. She leaned close to my ear, her voice a venomous hiss that belied her gentle appearance. Don't be too proud, Maya. You will be mine sooner or later. You'll see. I turned my head slowly, meeting her dark, glittering gaze. I arched a single brow and sighed theatrically. The beloved wife and his best friend's widow. Such a tragic, romantic tale. Tell me, Clara, if your dead husband knew you were scheming to take his comrade's bed, would he jump out of his grave in rage? She recoiled as if slapped. The color drained from her face, then flooded back in a mottled, angry red. She opened her mouth but no sound came out. Spinning around, she fled toward the end of the carriage, presumably to the bathroom, to reassemble her shattered composure. I had won that round. But the journey was long. As the train clattered on, the initial excitement died down. Leo, exhausted by the emotion and the motion, fell asleep on Kai's bunk. I stood by the window watching the countryside fly past, fields and villages that were a blur of green and brown, a world moving on without me just as it had in my first life. But this time I was moving with it. A few hours in, Clara approached me again. Her armor of false sweetness was back in place, thick and impenetrable. She held out a cup of hot water. You must be thirsty, she said, her voice soft with feigned concern. Thanks, I said coolly. But no. I turned my back to her, staring resolutely out at the passing scenery. Undeterred, she sat on the edge of my designated standing space, her voice a low, coaxing murmur meant only for my ears. Maya, why make this so difficult? Kai has a hard enough path in the army. For the sake of his future reputation, can't you just stop making trouble? Making trouble? I arched a brow, still not looking at her. Wanting to be with my own husband and son is making trouble? So what should I do? Should I have stayed in that hut, waiting to die alone, to make things more convenient for you? That's not what I meant, she said, biting her lip in that infuriatingly delicate way. It's just, the army's conditions are limited. Clara, I cut her off sharply, finally turning to face her. Drop the act. I can see right through the little schemes playing out behind your eyes. Her face flickered with surprise and annoyance. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? I sneered. You want my place. You want to be Captain Kai's wife. It's that simple, isn't it? Her cheeks flushed a blotchy red. You're slandering me. Kai was my husband's comrade. I respect him. Respect him so much you want to crawl into his bed, I stated, my voice flat and merciless, stripping her pretense bare. She shot to her feet, the cup in her hand falling and clattering to the floor, the hot water splashing across our feet. The sound drew every eye nearby. With a choked sob, she fled, once again heading for the sanctuary of the restroom. The commotion of course summoned Kai. He strode over, his face a thundercloud. Maya, he growled, his voice low and dangerous. What did you do now? When did you become such a shrew? I only spoke the truth, I said with a shrug, feigning nonchalance. What? Are you going to defend her honor again? He took a deep, steadying breath, the kind I imagined he used before addressing a difficult troop. Maya, you need to understand. Bringing Clara to the base is purely to honor the debt I owe her husband. If you are angry, be angry with me. Don't take it out on an innocent woman. Innocent? I stared straight into his eyes, refusing to let him look away. Then why can't you look me in the eye when you say that? His gaze wavered. For a single, telling second, his eyes darted away from mine before he forced them back, his expression hardening into sternness. Stop imagining things. Once we reach the base, you can stay for a few days to see it. Then you will go home. Do not make this harder for me than it already is. With that, he turned and walked back to his bunk, leaving me standing alone in the swaying corridor. I watched his retreating back, my fists clenched so tightly my nails bit half-moons into my palms. In my past life, it was my softness, my willingness to believe his lies, that had destroyed me. This time, the hardness in my heart was my only armor. The train carried us forward, rushing toward an uncertain future at the army base. But I was no longer a passive passenger in my own life. I was the engineer, and I would steer this train onto a track of my own choosing, no matter the collisions it caused. The train's final shuddering halt felt like the end of one life and the violent beginning of another. Kai's face was still set in a stony mask of displeasure as we disembarked. He had never planned for my presence, and my stubborn refusal to be erased was a constant, grating complication. The garrison was even more imposing than I had imagined from his sparse descriptions. It was a world unto itself, a fortress of order and discipline. Rows of identical blue brick houses stood in stern lines, their roofs neat and unyielding. From the vast training grounds, the synchronized chant of soldiers echoed, a powerful masculine rhythm that vibrated through the very air. The scent of dust, sweat, and diesel fuel hung in a potent mix. Clara, however, seemed to shed the strain of the journey the moment her feet touched the platform. She stepped forward with a proprietary air, her head held high as if she were the lady of the manor returning home. She walked slightly ahead, her posture perfectly aligning itself with Kai's, a silent declaration of their partnership. "Captain Kai, you're back." A group of women, clustered near the entrance to the family quarters, called out greetings. Their eyes, sharp with curiosity, swept over our little group, lingering on me with open speculation. A woman with an impressively permed head of curls stepped forward, her smile bright and inquisitive. "And this is?" she asked, her gaze flicking between Clara and me. Kai's introduction was a study in cold efficiency. He gestured first to me, his tone flat. "This is my wife, Maya." Then his hand moved to Clara, and his voice, while still formal, carried a subtle undercurrent of something. Respect? Protectiveness? "And this is Clara, the widow of my fallen comrade. She will be staying with the unit temporarily." The women's faces were a canvas of instant, unspoken understanding. Their smiles towards Clara were warmer, more knowing. The glances they shot me were laced with pity and dismissal. I had expected this. In my past life, Clara had woven herself into the fabric of this place, becoming the gentle, virtuous widow everyone adored, while I, the rustic, forgotten wife, was the inconvenient ghost. When housing was assigned, the hierarchy became physically manifest. As a battalion commander, Kai was allotted a small two-room apartment in a building reserved for officers' families. Clara, leveraging her status as a martyr's widow, was given a room in another building within the compound, a placement that felt both separate and dangerously proximate. "Hiya," Kai said, standing at the door of the sparse but clean apartment. "You can stay here for now. In a few days." He trailed off, the unspoken command hanging in the air. "You will leave." I gave a short, cold laugh. "Don't worry. I won't cling to you like a barnacle. I know when I'm not wanted." He frowned, the lines on his forehead deepening, but said nothing more. The silence between us was a chasm. The next morning I was woken not by the sun, but by the sound of voices just outside my window. They were pitched low, but the thin walls and their carrying tones made every word perfectly clear. "They say Captain Kai's wife is straight from the countryside. Can barely read." "Really? How can someone like that be a suitable match for a man like him?" "Exactly. Comrade Clara seems much more fitting. He's a teacher, you know. So refined." I lay still for a moment, letting their words wash over me. The old Maya would have curled into a ball of shame. The new one felt only a cold, clarifying anger. I threw back the thin blanket, marched to the door, and yanked it open. The group of 3 wives jumped, their conversation cutting off in a synchronized gasp of guilt. They stared at me, their faces flushing. "Good morning," I said, my voice cheerful, a sharp contrast to their embarrassment. I offered them a bright, wide smile. "I just arrived yesterday and don't know anyone yet. I hope you'll all be willing to look after me from now on." They nodded, a chorus of awkward, murmured assurances, before quickly scattering like startled birds. Words alone, I knew, would not be enough to win a place here. I had to earn their respect, or at the very least their need. My opportunity came at noon in the compound's communal cafeteria. The air was thick with the smell of overcooked cabbage and the grumbling of the wives in the queue. "This stew is inedible today. So salty. Honestly, the kitchen crew has no skill. Can't even make a proper bowl of noodles." I took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Sisters," I said, my voice clear and confident. "How about I make a meal for everyone today?" They turned to look at me, skepticism written on their faces. You know how to cook." "I grew up in the countryside," I said, already rolling up my sleeves. "I may not be good at much, but I know my way around a kitchen." Without waiting for permission, I walked into the kitchen. I ignored the surprised looks from the kitchen staff and beelined for the flour and the large wok. My hands, remembering a rhythm born of necessity, began to work. I kneaded the dough, pulled it into long, even strands, my movements swift and practiced. I found some chili peppers and garlic, quickly pounding them into a fragrant, spicy sauce. Within half an hour, I carried out a large pot of steaming, hand-pulled noodles, each strand chewy and perfect, and a bowl of my incendiary chili sauce. The wives gathered around, their skepticism giving way to tentative curiosity. They served themselves, took their first bites, and then their eyes widened. "Oh, these noodles have such a great texture. This sauce is incredible. So much better than the slop they usually serve us." The chorus of praise was genuine this time. Their attitude towards me thawed instantly. "Maya, you're truly skilled. You'll have to teach me how to do that someday," the woman with the permed hair, who I learned was called Mrs. Chin, said, her voice now warm and impressed. I smiled and agreed, knowing this was only the first fragile brick in the foundation I needed to build. Clara had spent years cultivating her reputation here. I would have to dismantle it brick by virtuous brick. A few days later I saw my chance. Mrs. Lee, another wife from the compound, approached Clara with a torn uniform jacket. "Clara, dear, could you mend this for me? My hands are all thumbs and I can't get the stitches right." Clara accepted it with her signature sweet smile. "Of course, Mrs. Lee, leave it to me." I watched from a few feet away as Clara took a needle and thread. Her stitches were large, loose, and haphazard. It was the work of someone who wanted to be seen mending, not someone who cared about the result. I walked over. "Clara," I said, my tone deliberately light, "your stitches are far too loose. With mending like that, it'll tear open again after just 1 or 2 wears." Mrs. Lee looked down, peered at the stitching, and her face fell. "Oh, she's right." Clara's smile stiffened. I usually take more care. I must have been rushing today." "Really?" I plucked the needle and jacket from her hands. "Let me show you." In a few deft, precise movements I sewed the tear closed. My stitches were small, tight, and nearly invisible. "There," I said, handing the jacket back to Mrs. Lee. "That should hold." Mrs. Lee's eyes lit up with admiration. "Maya, your skill is far superior." Clara's face paled. She forced a thin, strained smile, muttered an excuse and hurried away, her retreat a silent admission of defeat. I watched her go, a cold satisfaction settling in my chest. I was establishing my foothold. But I knew this was just the surface. The real battle, the one happening in the shadows between my husband and his virtuous widow, was yet to be won. And I was watching, always watching, waiting for the moment their carefully constructed world would crack. Bit by bit, I wove myself into the daily tapestry of the compound. My cooking became a small legend, with wives regularly showing up with a bag of flour or a request for my chili sauce recipe. I mended clothes with stitches that could survive a training exercise, and I listened to their troubles with a patience I had learned through my own suffering. I was no longer just Captain Kai's backward wife. I was Maya, who could pull a perfect noodle and keep a secret. But all the while my focus remained split. I watched Kai and Clara with the unblinking attention of a hawk circling its prey. Outwardly they maintained the impeccable facade of a soldier and his charge, a bond of respect and duty. But the cracks were there, visible only to someone who knew to look. Clara always seemed to materialize with a cup of tea just as Kai returned from training, her timing too perfect to be coincidental. Sometimes I would find a long dark strand of hair on his uniform shirt, a shade that matched Clara's, not my own shorter, lighter ones. And she had a habit of slipping into our apartment when I was out, under the guise of helping to tidy up, her presence lingering in the subtle displacement of a chair or the faint scent of her lavender soap on Kai's desk. The tension in our small apartment was a thick, suffocating fog. Kai and I moved around each other like ghosts, speaking only when necessary, our conversations clipped and functional. He spent more and more evenings at the office, returning long after I had extinguished the kerosene lamp. I said nothing. I was gathering kindling for a fire that would consume them both. Then one afternoon I found my match. I had gone to the market earlier than planned, the vendor I wanted having received a fresh shipment of eggs. I returned to the compound under the blinding midday sun, the place quiet as most families were taking their afternoon rest. As I approached our building I saw her. "Clara, glancing furtively over her shoulder before slipping through my front door. My steps slowed then stopped. I moved to the side of the building, positioning myself by the open window of our main room. I could see her shadow moving inside. She went straight to Kai's desk. My heart hammered against my ribs, a cold, steady rhythm. I watched as she pulled a key from her pocket, a key to my home, unlocked the bottom drawer and withdrew a small folded stack of papers. She glanced at one, a small triumphant smile playing on her lips, before slipping it into the pocket of her trousers. That was enough. I walked to the door, my footsteps silent on the packed earth. I leaned against the doorframe, my arms crossed. "Find anything interesting, Clara?" She jumped, whirling around, her hand flying to her chest. The papers in her pocket crinkled audibly. Her face was a mask of sheer panic, quickly schooled into weak indignation. "Why, you startled me. I was just helping Kai organize his papers. They were in such a mess." "Is that so?" I didn't raise my voice. I walked forward, my gaze locked on hers, and yanked open the drawer she had just closed. Inside, amidst other documents, lay an unfinished letter. The opening line was written in Kai's distinct, angular script. "My dearest Clara, as I write these words, I miss you terribly." The world narrowed to that single line of text. There was no surprise, only a cold, vindictive clarity. Clara's face drained of all color, leaving her as pale as the paper. "It's not what you think," she gasped. I picked up the letter, my hand steady. I didn't need to read more. "It seems," I said, my voice dangerously soft, "that I need to have a very long conversation with Captain Kai." That night Kai came home later than ever. I sat in the main room, a basket of mending at my feet, the kerosene lamp casting long dancing shadows. I heard his footsteps outside, hesitant, heavier than usual. He was pacing. "Come in, Kai," I called out, not looking up from the sock I was darning. "There's no point hiding out there." The door creaked open. He stood on the threshold, his uniform jacket slung over his arm, his face etched with a deep exhaustion that went beyond physical fatigue. "Paya," he began, his voice rough. "About today." "Today." I set down the needle and thread and finally looked at him. My gaze was flat, devoid of the anger he expected. It seemed to unnerve him more. "Are you talking about the love letters you've been secretly writing to Clara, or about when you were planning to finally tell me you want a divorce?" The blood drained from his face. He looked like a man who had been shot. His mouth opened but no sound emerged. "Not talking." I stood up slowly. "Then I'll talk for you." I walked to the desk, pulled out the unfinished letter and held it up to the lamplight. My voice was clear and steady, each word a hammer blow. "My dearest Clara, as I write these words, I miss you terribly. Since our last meeting I have thought of little else. The matter of the dependent passes has been settled." "That's enough." Kai's voice was a strangled roar, a vein throbbing at his temple. He took a step toward me, his fists clenched. "Enough." I let out a mirthless laugh. "Is it? Do you dare swear on your honor as a soldier that you brought Clara here only out of duty to a dead man? Do you dare look me in the eye and swear that what is between you is pure and innocent?" His clenched fists trembled. The fight seemed to go out of him all at once. His shoulders slumped, and he collapsed into the wooden chair as if his bones had turned to water. He buried his face in his hands. "I have wronged you," he whispered, the admission torn from him. "But Clara, she is." "She is what?" I pressed, my voice icy. "More important than your lawful wife? More deserving of your protection than the mother of your child." At that moment I heard a faint scuffling sound at the door. I strode over and yanked it open. Clara tumbled inside, stumbling and nearly falling to her knees. She had been crouched there listening. "So," I said, looking down at her. "Eavesdropping now? Couldn't resist hearing your own love story." "Kai," she cried, scrambling to her feet. Her face was a mess of tears. I was worried about you." "Worried?" I sneered. "Worried your little affair was about to be exposed?" Suddenly Clara dropped to her knees. She crawled forward and clutched at the hem of my trousers, her body racked with sobs. It was a magnificent performance. "Maya, it's all my fault. I seduced him. It was me. If you want to blame someone, blame me. Please don't punish Kai." I stared down at her with utter disgust. I shook my leg, dislodging her grasping hands. And who exactly are you performing for now? I asked coldly. Do you think taking all the blame makes you noble? Or does it just make you a more convincing martyr? Kai surged to his feet, moving to stand beside her, a protector once more. Aya, calm down. We can talk about this rationally. I looked at him, this man who had once been my whole world, now standing in solidarity with the woman who had destroyed it. The last flicker of warmth I held for him turned to cold, dead ash. Fine. Perfect, I said, nodding slowly. Since your love for her is so profound, I will help you fulfill it. I walked to the cabinet and pulled out a thick stack of papers I had been secretly compiling over the past weeks. It was a record of every suspicious act, dates and times of Clara's unauthorized entries into our home, witnessed accounts of her long private meetings with Kai, even signed statements from a few of the kitchen staff about how she had once accidentally thrown away the medicinal tonic I had prepared for him. Tomorrow morning, I said, my voice steady and deliberate, at the regimental assembly, I will present all of this to the commissar. Captain Kai, you who are so concerned with honor and rules, let's see if a man who betrays his marriage can keep the stars on his shoulders. Kai's face went ghostly white. He stumbled back a step, his hand reaching for the wall to steady himself. Aya, you wouldn't. Clara collapsed on the floor in a heap, her sobs turning into ragged, helpless wails. I looked from one to the other, my expression impassive. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. in the auditorium. You are of course free not to attend, but you will face the consequences regardless. With that I turned, walked into the bedroom where Leo slept and shut the door firmly behind me. I leaned against it, listening to the sounds of their shattered world on the other side. Kai lit a cigarette, the sharp scent of tobacco soon permeating the thin wood of the door. He would smoke the night away. I, however, lay down next to my son and slept more soundly than I had in years. The storm was coming, and this time I was the one holding the lightning. I slept a deep, dreamless sleep, the kind that comes only after a long and bitter war has been declared. When I awoke, the first gray light of dawn was filtering through the window. The apartment was silent, but the air was thick with the lingering scent of cigarette smoke and despair. Kai had not come to bed. I rose and dressed with care, putting on the best clothes I had brought with me, a simple well-made blue tunic and dark trousers. I brushed my hair until it shone and looked at my reflection in the small, cracked mirror. The woman who stared back was not the broken creature of my past life, nor the frantic wife of the train journey. Her eyes were calm, her posture resolved. She was a force of reckoning. By the time I left the bedroom, Kai was standing by the main door, already in his full dress uniform. He looked as if he had aged 10 years in a single night. His eyes were hollow, his face etched with deep lines of strain. He said nothing, merely opened the door and waited for me to pass through. The entire base was buzzing. Word of the impending scandal had spread like wildfire through the family quarters and the barracks. As we approached the auditorium, a river of people in uniform and civilian clothes was flowing towards the large double doors. The air hummed with suppressed excitement and grim curiosity. When I entered, every seat was filled. People lined the walls, crammed the aisles, their necks craning to get a look at us. I walked to the front of the hall, my head high, my back straight. The whispers rose in a wave around me. Behind me, Kai followed, his face a mask of ashen stoicism. A few moments later, Clara arrived, supported by 2 stern-faced female soldiers. She was pale and trembling, her eyes red raw from crying, playing the role of the fragile victim to perfection. I reached the podium and stood before the microphone. On the raised dais in front of me sat the unit's senior officers, led by Commissar Zhang, a man with a kind but unyielding face. The hall fell into a hush so complete I could hear the rustle of my own papers. Comrades, I began, my voice clear and firm, carrying to the very back of the hall. Leaders, I stand before you today to report a grave matter, a violation of the sacred trust of military marriage and a betrayal of the honor this uniform represents. A collective gasp swept through the room. I saw Commissar Zhang lean forward, his expression turning grim. I raised the thick stack of evidence in my hand. What I hold here is a record of the improper relationship between Captain Kai and the widow Clara, gathered over the past month. It includes, but is not limited to, records of secret correspondence, sworn statements of late-night meetings, and multiple witnessed accounts of Clara entering my home without my knowledge to go through my husband's private belongings. Lies. Clara's shrill scream cut through the silence. She pointed a trembling finger at me. She's slandering me. She's a jealous, hateful woman. Slander. I repeated coldly. I reached into my inner pocket and pulled out one final, decisive slip of paper. I held it aloft for the entire assembly to see. It was a form from the military hospital. Then how do you explain this? I let the silence hang for a beat, ensuring every eye was on that paper. An examination report, I announced, my voice ringing with finality. Confirmed pregnancy. 6 weeks. Clara, do you dare stand before all these people and swear this child is not Captain Kai's? The silence in the auditorium was absolute, profound. It was the silence of a bomb blast, sucking all the air from the room. Claire made a small choked sound. Her eyes rolled back in her head and her legs gave way. She collapsed to the floor in a dead faint, the 2 female soldiers scrambling to catch her. The dramatic faint was as good as a confession. All eyes swiveled to Kai. He looked as if he had been struck by lightning, his body rigid, his face devoid of all color. The entire edifice of his life, his career, his honor, his carefully constructed lies, was crumbling around him. Commissar Zhang rose slowly to his feet, his face like granite. Comrade Kai, his voice boomed in the dead quiet. Are these accusations true? The weight of hundreds of stares pressed down on him. His Adam's apple bobbed. He slowly, deliberately reached up and removed his cap, holding it in his hands. It was a gesture of profound surrender. His voice was a hoarse whisper. He cleared his throat, tried again. I will accept the organization's investigation. That single sentence was an admission of guilt. The hall erupted. Shouts of disbelief, angry murmurs, and scornful whispers filled the air. The officers on the dais huddled together, their conversation urgent and low. After a few minutes that felt like an eternity, Commissar Zhang motioned for silence. The crowd slowly quieted, eager for the verdict. The decisions of this disciplinary hearing are as follows, he announced, his voice cutting through the tension. First, Captain Kai is hereby suspended from all duties and will be placed under immediate disciplinary review, pending a full investigation. A wave of noise rippled through the crowd. Kai flinched as if physically struck. Second, Commissar Zhang continued, the dependent status of Clara is revoked, effective immediately. She is to be escorted from the base today and returned to her place of origin. A satisfied murmur met this pronouncement. Third, his gaze softened slightly as it fell on me. The organization will facilitate and support Comrade Maya's petition for divorce and ensure she and her son receive the compensation and support they are due. It was over. The gavel of justice had fallen. I had won. As the meeting was adjourned and the crowd began to disperse, buzzing with the sensational news, I walked out of the auditorium. The morning sun was warm on my face, its light feeling like a baptism. I had stepped out of the shadows and into my own life. Maya. Kai's voice, ragged and broken, came from behind me. I stopped but did not turn around. He caught up, standing beside me, his posture defeated. Please, give me a chance to explain. I finally turned my head and looked at him. I looked at the uniform, the man, the ghost of a love that had died 2 lifetimes ago. Captain Kai, I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. The moment you chose to betray this family, you lost the right to explain anything to me. I did not wait for a response. I turned and walked away, my steps firm and sure, and I did not look back. Not once. The days that followed the hearing were a whirlwind of quiet, efficient activity. The army, once a fortress that had excluded me, now moved with a brisk, bureaucratic compassion to rectify the wrongs done to me. The scandal had shaken the command, and my treatment became a matter of institutional pride. An officer from the political department sat with me, his expression a mixture of sympathy and severity. Comrade Maya, he said, pushing a set of forms across the table. The organization has condemned Captain Kai's actions in the strongest terms. We will expedite your divorce. Furthermore, as a gesture of the Army's support and in light of the unique circumstances, we are offering you a permanent residence in the family quarters and a position in the base cafeteria. I accepted the forms, my hands steady. Thank you, I said, my voice even. There was no triumph in it, only a weary sense of closure. The small apartment they gave me was not unlike the one I had shared with Kai, but it felt entirely different. The air was not thick with lies and tension. It was mine. Leo and I moved in with our few belongings. The first night I cooked a simple meal on the single-burner stove, and we ate at the small table, the silence between us comfortable and safe. "Are we not living with Papa anymore?" Leo asked, his small brow furrowed. I put down my chopsticks and took his hand. "No, my love. Papa made some choices that hurt our family. So now it will be just you and me. Is that okay?" He thought for a moment, then nodded, a surprisingly mature understanding in his young eyes. "Miss Clara made you sad?" I didn't like it. Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them away. They were not tears of sorrow but of fierce, protective love. "She won't make anyone sad anymore, Leo. I promise you that." My new life began to take shape. The job in the cafeteria was mundane, but it was honest work that paid a small wage and gave me a sense of purpose and independence. The other wives who had once gossiped about me, now treated me with a respectful distance, tinged with a newfound admiration for my strength. I was no longer a victim. I was the woman who had faced down a battalion commander and won. I heard snippets of what happened to them, the ghosts of my past life. Clara was indeed sent back to her hometown, escorted to the train station by two stony-faced junior officers. There were no tearful goodbyes, no dramatic scenes. She was erased from the base with a cold, administrative finality. The shame would follow her, a permanent stain in her small community. The child she carried would be a lifelong reminder of the price of her treachery. Kai lost everything. His suspension became a full court-martial. He was stripped of his rank, his command, and his honor. He was not jailed, but he was discharged from the army in disgrace, his career and reputation in ruins. He was given a job as a low-level clerk in a distant city, a fate perhaps worse than prison for a man of his ambition. Sometimes I would see him. He had been allowed to stay in his apartment until the divorce was finalized and his transfer processed. From my window, I would spot him standing far away on the edge of the training grounds, a solitary, shrunken figure in civilian clothes, watching our building. He never dared to come closer. The man who had once commanded hundreds could no longer face the wife and son he had destroyed. I felt nothing when I saw him, no hatred, no pity. Just a vast, empty space where my love for him had once been. One afternoon as I was returning from the market, he was there waiting by the path to my building. He looked older, his shoulders slumped, the sharp, commanding angles of his face softened by defeat. "Maya," he said, his voice rough. I stopped but did not invite conversation. I simply waited. He looked at the ground, then back at me, his eyes full of a pain I knew was genuine. I am sorry. For everything. I failed you. I failed Leo." I looked at him, this stranger who had been my husband. "Yes," I said simply. "You did." He seemed to shrink even further. Is there any chance for forgiveness? Not for us, I know that's impossible. But just for peace." I considered his question. Forgiveness was a luxury for a woman who had died alone in a hut. The woman I was now dealt in consequences, not absolution. "The peace you're looking for, Kai," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "you will have to find it on your own. Leo and I have already found ours." I saw the finality of my words hit him. He nodded slowly, a gesture of utter surrender. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his figure growing smaller and smaller until he disappeared around a corner. I stood there for a moment, watching the empty space where he had been. A weight I had carried for 2 lifetimes seemed to lift from my shoulders, scattering on the wind like dust. It was truly over. I turned and walked towards my apartment, towards the smell of food I had cooked, towards the sound of my son's laughter. I had severed the poisonous ties with my own hands. For the first time in 2 lifetimes I was free. The road ahead was mine to walk, and I would walk it not as a victim, not as a wife, but as Maya. Just Maya. The final divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday. They were delivered by a young, serious-faced courier who offered me a crisp salute before handing over the thick envelope. I took it inside, sat at my small table and read every word. The language was dry and legal, but to me it was a poem of liberation. It was done. I was no longer bound by promise or law to the man who had shattered my trust across 2 lifetimes. I filed the papers carefully in a wooden box along with my other important documents. Leo's birth certificate, my identification, the deed to this small apartment the army had granted me permanently. It was a box that held the architecture of my new self-determined life. That life had a rhythm now, a gentle, predictable cadence that was its own kind of music. My days began early before the sun had fully chased the chill from the air. I would prepare breakfast for Leo, a soft-boiled egg, a bowl of congee, and see him off to the base's small school. Then I would walk to the cafeteria, the morning light painting the baroque walls in shades of gold. The work was physical, but it was honest. My hands, which had once trembled holding a farewell letter, were now steady as they kneaded vast mounds of dough or chopped vegetables with swift, efficient strokes. The other kitchen workers, initially wary of the woman at the center of the base's biggest scandal, had come to respect my quiet competence. I didn't speak much, but I worked hard and I was fair. The wives from the compound still came to me not for gossip but for my cooking. Mrs. Chin, she of the impressive perm, had become a regular visitor, often appearing with a culinary problem. "Maya, my pork buns are never as fluffy as yours. What's your secret?" I showed her how to proof the yeast just so, how to pleat the dough without squeezing the air out. Felt good, this sharing of simple, tangible skills. It built bridges made of flour and steam, far sturdier than those built on whispered confidences. One evening, as I was closing up the cafeteria, Commissar Zhang's wife approached me. She was a dignified woman with kind eyes. "Maya," she said, her voice soft. "I won't pretend to know what you've been through. But the way you've carried yourself, with such strength, such dignity, it has been noted. There is an opening for an assistant in the base nursery school. The hours would be better for you and Leo. I've put in a word for you." I was taken aback. This was more than pity, it was respect. "Thank you," I said, and the words felt inadequate for the swell of gratitude in my chest. I would be very interested. Leo was thriving. Freed from the tension that had once shrouded his father's house, his true personality began to blossom. He brought home drawings not of soldiers and tanks, but of the flowers that grew near our building and the fat, friendly cat that prowled the compound. He laughed more, a free, unburdened sound that was the truest measure of my success. He asked about his father less and less, the memory of that stern, distant figure fading like an old photograph. I never spoke ill of Kai to him. The truth was, I rarely spoke of him at all. He had become irrelevant, a closed chapter. My energy was for the present, for the future we were building. I took the job at the nursery school. It was a room filled with light and the chaotic, joyful noise of children. I helped them with their letters, wiped their tears and tied their shoes. In their unjudging eyes I found a profound peace. I was not Captain Kai's wife. I was not the wronged woman from the scandal. I was just Auntie Maya, who could tell good stories and always had a clean handkerchief. One weekend I took Leo on a trip into the city. We rode the bus, his face pressed to the window in wonder. We ate noodles at a small restaurant, and I bought him a book of folk tales and a new pencil case. As we walked back to the bus station, his small hand tucked securely in mine, I looked around at the bustling streets, at the lives intersecting and moving forward, and I felt not like an outsider but a part of it all. I had a roof over my head that was mine. I had work that sustained us. I had my son healthy and happy by my side. The love I had once poured into a man who did not deserve it, I now channeled into building a life that was resilient and whole. The past, with its bitter lessons, was not a chain around my neck, but a foundation beneath my feet. It had taught me the price of meekness and the power of my own voice. It had shown me that my worth was not defined by my relationship to any man. That night, after I had put Leo to bed and read him a story, I stood by the window looking out at the quiet compound. The stars were sharp and clear in the cold night sky. There was no gnawing anxiety in my gut, no dread for the tomorrow. There was only a quiet certainty. The road ahead was still long and I knew there would be challenges. But they would be my challenges to meet. Maya, had carved out this space for myself with my own two hands. I had faced down the ghosts of a past life and reclaimed my own. For the first time in this life or the last, I was not waiting for a promise to be kept. I was not defined by a betrayal. I was simply and completely myself. And that was more than enough. The end.